In the event that you are new to this wonderful card game and you have not yet signed up for a UGN Play account, you can now sign up with my exclusive referral code Alliteration and get yourself 50 bonus loyalty points for free. For free? For free. As well as additional loyalty points for every event that you play in within my referral code period. Why do you need these, you might ask? Well, loyalty points can be used to redeem free promotional cards in the mail, as well as other exclusive items coming in the future. The bonus points from using my code are enough to redeem almost any promo card right off the bat, and having your UGN account is going to allow you to accrue and track more and more as you go through your hero or villain's journey. If free cards and progression all sound super appealing to you, the links for all of this are going to be in the description below. Now, let's get on to the video. Welcome, my dear viewers, to another Alliteration Gaming video. My name's Levi, and today we're talking bans, baby. Yes, my friends, it's about that time again. Our national season has concluded, and while things were very fun and very exciting and very thrilling, boy, do I have some thoughts about this format. Heroes Clash brought a lot of really cool things into the game, and I'm extremely thankful for it, but it's definitely pivoted us into a much different realm than we were before, and I think it warrants quite a lot of discussion. So before we go into the bans itself, I do want to talk a little bit about the format to kind of provide context as a whole, given that this ban list I created is predominantly aggro focused. It's extremely shifted towards hitting a lot of the aggro decks because, surprise, we're in a very aggro format right now. If you look at all the top cut national results, the finalists, the deck lists, everything is aggro. We are in the world of turn 2 kills right now, and I just don't think it's a very fantastic place for us to be. I think there's a handful of characters just doing like absurdly unfair things right now, and they're doing it very early on in the game, and it's kind of just shifted us towards a game state where against most of the best decks in the format, you'll be kind of surprised if you actually make it to turn 3. I don't think the card design in Heroes Clash was like that aggro focused, and it's like the sole reason why we've shifted into a meta like this. A handful of the best cards from this set are employed really well by a few characters that are just really specialized in doing that sort of playstyle. And while I do think something like that has a place in the game to some extent, it shouldn't be so free and so consistent if the entirety of the field thinks that it's what they need to do to even have a shot at competing at the top tables. Something really noteworthy about a lot of these national events, and I've said this before in other videos, but a lot of really well-known community members who are really well known for specializing in certain niche characters have all shifted towards a couple of the best decks in the format just because of how leagues ahead they are. I can imagine also something to do with like nationals being a much higher stakes tournament, right? There's a lot of factors to consider, but regardless, you can't deny the fact that there are two decks sitting way above the rest of the board, and it's not even close. So that's kind of the context of the format we're in right now, and before we get into the bans, I also want to talk a little bit about philosophy, and by that I just mean what's the actual purpose of this ban list, what it seeks to bring forth, what kind of order it wants to put on the table. I don't think that turn 2s don't have a place in the game whatsoever. I don't think you should just never die on turn 2. I don't think aggro decks should be just trash and unplayable. I want all of these characters to continue to thrive and prosper. I just think that what they're doing right now is conceptually okay. They're just doing it way too much towards an extreme, right? Is it okay for a deck to occasionally, after putting in a lot of hard work and thought and then finding a little luck, to turn 2 people? Absolutely. Should they be doing it hyper consistently with no risks or drawbacks whatsoever? Absolutely not. And this is what I really mean when I talk about philosophy. Even though I might not personally as a player like exactly what these decks are doing, they certainly have a place in the game, and I have zero interest in neutering them or nerfing them to absolute death. I want these characters / decks to continue to thrive and prosper. I just want to bring them in line a bit so that things don't look as cookie cutter as they do right now. And the last thing I want to note before we actually get into these bans is that these are just my opinions. These are just my thoughts based on my personal experiences and my viewpoints of the game, both as a player and as a viewer. As a viewer, it is not fun watching Tokoyamis turn to each other in 5 minutes, and as a commentator, it is not fun talking about how Tokoyamis turn to each other in 5 minutes. I think a lot of these characters and their playstyles don't have as intricate lines as they could. They don't offer as much room for player expression, and overall, I don't think they provide a very true and genuine window into what competitive play of this game could be like if these things were a little more in line, because they just don't let us showcase a lot of the really cool interactions amongst players and intricate lines they have to take on the aggression and the defense, because it's just so lopsided one way all the time. And now with all that being said, guys, these are 6 changes that I would personally make that I think would bring our meta in line and provide a much more healthy and positive play experience for our competitive game. Starting off, if we're talking about turn 2 and people with no risks and no drawbacks whatsoever, here is Tokoyami. We've got to summon the light, guys. Tokoyami's got to get looked at. This man has been completely obliterating our national events, and I think that if he is not dealt with, he's only going to continue to do this at Worlds, and then from there on out after. Tokoyami is an absolute powerhouse of a deck, and this is not his first time in the spotlight. Back in set 1, the deck was very strong. It was a lot more high rolly, but once it started gaining pieces like Crow and Frog Takedown, it became much more of a threat, and then set 2 really brought it into the limelight. Tim Keefe took it to Vegas and took down the whole event with it, and he saw a lot more play from there on out, utilizing a lot of the really strong new fire stuff that set 2 brought into the equation. The deck was an absolute monster, and it really only fell off because that Asui list that was really good at turn 2 and people started popping up, and people just realized that that was a much more efficient and consistent way to take that turn 2 execution playstyle. And then when that got banned to heck, Momo just rose to dominance so hard, and she was such a defensive powerhouse that Tokoyami just could not crack that wall. But now we are living in a set 3 world, and things are very different. There is not a wall that Tokoyami cannot crack. Heroes Clash brought him such a slew of insane new tools, really bringing to prominence the chaos symbol on him, giving them such a insane 0 difficulty lineup, letting them play so many free foundations that just offer so much free value. Awesome tech like Twisting Azure Inferno and Petty Squabble give him so much more utility and so much more consistency and so much more early aggression. I mean, this deck is just unstoppable, man. If you are in the camp that this deck should not be touched, you have just not played against it enough. The negative play experience of Tokoyami just building 5 or 6 turn 1 and then just rolling 5 to 6 like 10, 12 damage moves at you for no cost whatsoever, it's just really, really oppressive. It's really hard to deal with. It does not make for a fun game. One of the cornerstones of balance in this game is risk assessment, especially for a lot of the early game aggro decks. They always have to like weigh in if it's valuable or not to go in. Is it going to leave them vulnerable? All kinds of things like that. But Tokoyami does not have to worry about those things. He has so many cards that just like are non-negotiable to jam down regardless of whether you're going to go for like a full attack string or not. And then you just get free damage because your opponent's not allowed to block those things out of fear of the bigger ones that could be coming later on. And it just lets him play really, really greedily. Like I've seen so many worlds where Tokoyami plays like 3 or 4 attacks turn 2, deals like half your life total, and then like builds 3-0 diffs and then passes and says, okay, what can you do? You can't risk attacking into me unless you can deal 20, which is actually like 25, 26 because -1 damage to everything. But then if you only attack into him a little bit and you pass back into him with like half of a ready board, he's going to kill you no matter what. But if you pass into him with a full ready board and don't attack at all, he gets to sculpt for free and piece together an even more ridiculous aggro hand. And with the amount of output that he has, he probably kills you through a ready board anyway. So it just takes a lot of the decision making out of the equation, and it's really, really unfun. Tokoyami is an extremely strong hyper aggro deck, the best hyper aggro deck, and he breaks a ton of the game's rules to do it, and I don't think that that should really have a place in the game. I think it is very okay for Tokoyami to turn 2 people occasionally, and he probably needs to be thinking a little bit to do it, but at the moment, Tokoyami just dumpsters out 50, 60 damage on turn 2 without even really thinking way too consistently, and that's why he's been the second most represented deck at all these national events and been winning the majority of them as well. Tokoyami is a massive problem. So how do we fix it, right? I'm an answers guy, I'm not a problems guy. I've talked about the problem enough. How do we fix it? Historically speaking, there have been many ways brought up to fix Tokoyami. Some people think Ruin is the problem, some people think Crow and Frog is the problem, some people think the character guard should just be banned outright and we should get a new one. This discussion is kind of going around in circles for quite a while now. Back in my previous ban list video in season 2, I also talked about Tokoyami. This was before like the whole Asui phase and the whole Momo phase. This is when Tokoyami was still like a really big deal in the format. And my proposed change back then was that Summon Dark Shadow now says it can be the only action card you play. So this was back when the Fire Bill was a very big deal. So it would shut out things like your Sugar Rushes and your Evil Gazes, but most importantly, it would only let you play one Summon Dark Shadow. And this is kind of the driving force behind this change. Now, I've seen a lot of people say that you can errata Summon Dark Shadow to say commit your character as cost instead of as effect. So that way, again, you can only play one unless you're going to ready your character with Crow and Frog, which is a lot of moving parts and probably fine. So I'm very on board that change. Actually, I think it's a little bit of a cleaner way to say this is the only action you can play type of thing. And I've also seen it suggested that Dark Shadow only pumps ally attack with the +1 speed, +1 damage, which I also really like. So that's what I'm bringing forth here to Dark Shadow. You errata the card to say commit your character as cost, and then it only gives +1/+1 to ally attacks. Now this is like a significant amount of text to change on this card, so like whether you want to like do the double errata or just go in and ban it and then print a new one that is the exact same name with all of these fixed abilities, whatever Jasco thinks is the right call. I don't really lean towards any specific way. I guess if you just errata it and then quickly ship out the printed fixed ones, people can still play their XRs and stuff, so that's probably fine there. That's actually what I really wish they'd have done with Unwavering Slash, like just errata it to say like it only builds earphone jack and then re-release the printed version. When Tokoyami starts using multiple Summon Dark Shadows, that's when things get really obnoxious, especially really early on in the game. If he finds like 2 Dark Shadows on turn 2 with like 4 attacks, he's playing them all. Like inconsequentially, he's playing them all, and it's just gonna get very, very ridiculous very fast. Also, like, it doesn't even make sense. In the show, he's got 1 Summon Dark Shadow. Why the heck does my Tokoyami rival have 3 Summon Dark Shadows in his card pool? What is even going on here? And that is how I think we can summon the light and bring Tokoyami in line with the rest of the field a little bit more. I don't think this kills the deck by any means. It just makes its aggro a lot less oppressive, especially in the very early stages of the game. And if you think there's a world where this isn't actually enough to bring Tokoyami down to size, don't worry, there's more on this list later on that also addresses him. But for now, we're going to move on and focus on problem number 2, and that is Kirishima 2, my friend. There's a riot in the streets about this guy. Kirishima 2 is way too strong. When Kirishima 2 first came out and first got revealed, a lot of people thought that he was going to be the best thing since sliced bread, and then the competitive season continued to undergo, and really, he only saw a couple major performances here and there, but nothing too crazy, and I think a lot of people just kind of started to ignore the character a little bit. Always acknowledged him as very strong, but definitely not like a problem in any sense of the word. But guys, Set 3 has just changed that. Kirishima 2, or should I say the Earth symbol, really has just gotten way too much good support. That's really brought it up to the top of the curve, and that's really just led to a rise of the best generic Earth symbol character, and that is Kirishima 2. The ability to just essentially ready 4 foundations across every single turn cycle. You have the emergency half block button on your face at all times. You get to sift through the equivalent of 10 cards a turn. This guy's just got way too many things going on, and I don't think that he's the best deck in the room, but he's the best free deck in the room. Bringing Kirishima 2 to an event is essentially a golden ticket into top cuts. It's like he's so consistent, he's so stable, he's so reliable, and he's so forgiving. You can make so many mistakes playing this guy and be terribly unpunished. Furthermore, the things that make him so strong, right? His very powerful character abilities are just such a hard counter to so many decks in the format, especially a lot of the rogue decks. So when Kirishima is such a highly represented deck, there's a lot of other decks that simply put can't fight him, and so they just do not get to exist in the format. He's like a gatekeeper in a sense. Kirishima is a deck that loses to the best aggro decks, but pub stomps the worst aggro decks, and then has like at least like a 60-40 into pretty much everything else. And those are just metrics that make it really hard to play decks that aren't Kirishima or the best aggro decks. And I think he just locks down the format in a lot of ways. Furthermore, if we're going to talk about turn 2s, we got to bring up Kirishima as well, because this guy, if he just draws like 5 attacks turn 2, it's pretty likely that he'll just be able to play them all between his double foundation reset on his face and then like half the attacks in his deck building in a new ready foundation somehow. He just gets to play like his whole hand on turn 2 if he really feels like it, and it's extremely obnoxious, and it just gives him way too much aggressive power on top of the insane amounts of defensive power that he has. And like I get that's like his whole thing, right? Hardening is for offense and defense. That's his whole theme, and I don't want to ruin that by any means, but he's way too good at doing both of them. I want this character to be a jack of all trades still, but right now he's just a master of all of them. And to bring up the whole risk versus reward philosophy that I think is really awesome about this game, Kirishima also totally ignores that, much in the same manner as Tokoyami does. Kirishima can jam a back alley haymaker no matter what, 24/7, 100% of the time, because if you check a 3, you build in a 0, and then you destroy and rebuild 1 foundation, and then whoa, nothing happened, right? Heck, you build in your season the advantage you played before, that foundation's back too, and it's just so much free value, and it just takes all of the risk of like playing the cards in your hand completely out of the equation, because you just have so much foundation resetting, so much resource ramp, so much draw power, that there's never a punishment to anything you're doing. And then even if you do actually just mess up, you go into your opponent's turn fully committed out, you are going to, at worst, ready 2 foundations over the course of 2 attacks, and you have a free half block of anything on your face. So again, if you mess up, it's extremely forgiving. Much in the same manner of Tokoyami is like, if you mess up, they have to find perfect lethal if they want to punish you at all. Otherwise, you just get to continue playing like a greed goblin scot-free. Kirishima is the same way. You get to play your whole hand, and then if you truly mess up and you truly put yourself in a bad spot, they have to find really, really optimal conditions to take advantage of it whatsoever. And so of course, that's the problem. How do we fix him though? Kirishima, I think, is actually a pretty easy fix. I think all you really have to do with this guy is make his twice per turn, once per turn. It being usable on both turns is super fine. The real big issue here is the twice per turn, right? It was the same issue with Kirishima 1. Very, very fine, solid ability, but then we let him do it twice. Why do we let him do it twice? And we did the same thing with Kirishima 2. All you gotta do is slap once per turn on this guy's twice per turn, and I think he's perfectly fine. He's still gonna be very strong. He's still gonna be getting 2 readies per cycle, not 4 though, which is a big, big, big change. You're cutting in half the biggest value portion of the character, and pretty much the same thing as Tokoyami. If you think that that's not enough to bring him in line, the other things on this list going forward are also going to mess with him a little bit. But for now, we're going to keep trucking on this list and arrive at our next character that I want to deal with, and that is Asui 1. The pharaohs of Jasco have delivered unto us a plague of frogs again, and it's time to talk about dealing with this character once more. Now, Asui is a character with a pretty bloody history in the MHA CCG. Going back to the very middle of Set 2's competitive format, she was absolutely the most dominant force in the game. She was an extremely oppressive, hyper aggro deck to play against, and was definitely the most negative play experience that we had seen since the coordinated effort Kirishima era. And people were crying out left and right to deal with this character. Ban this character, errata this character, fix her somehow, please, 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 Jasco. And Jasco responded in a way that I think surprised a lot of people, is they left her character card completely alone and instead banned Frog Lashing and Amphibious, pretty much the 2 best cards in her entire kit that were being abused throughout her and the whole format. And that did the job though. It brought her in line, it pretty much destroyed the hyper aggro turn 2 railgun Asui decks, and she just kind of became a fine, solid, strong deck. She definitely like fell off completely competitively. No one really touched that character after, but I think if anything, people were really just tired of playing her. She was still pretty competitively viable in my opinion. But now Set 3 has come out and brought this character right into the limelight again, and maybe not nearly as problematic as Kirishima and Tokoyami. I think they're the obvious big offenders right now, but after you pass those 2 up, Asui is one of the most dominant decks. Once we get to the top cuts, there's always 1 or 2 of them there, and there's nothing inherently wrong with that. I just think she's a character card that kind of needs to be re-looked at now. While yes, a couple months ago, banning her 2 best cards was enough to bring her in line, she's got a bunch of new best cards right now. The Eraserhead starter deck combined with a lot of the new ranged attacks in Set 3 just really sent this character over the edge once more, and we're once again living in a world where Asui is just playing like, you know, 7-8 attacks a turn, and now they all have extra damage pump, and now she has so much more draw power too. Like the new Water Asui builds are essentially the Life builds 2.0. They can still just draw like 1,000 attacks on turn 2 and probably play them all and murder you, or they'll go into a late game scenario where essentially you're just on a clock until they draw just an insurmountable amount of attacks, because whether they can play them all or not is just never a question. Once Asui gets to like an 8, 9, or 10 foundation stage, she's playing as many attacks as she can possibly draw. And while once again that's not such a massive problem right now, the big issues are Kirishima and Tokoyami. If we deal with Kirishima and Tokoyami, we also need to evaluate what takes their place, right? What are the best decks right now under those 2 guys? And there are a few of them that also get answered by this list. Asui is one of them, and I think it's just about time that we finally deal with this character card once and for all. Could we make Exhausted Exclamation once per turn? Sure. Could we make Prone to Dry Eyes Eraserhead Enhance only? Sure. We could do all those little minimal things and probably bring her in line for the time being, but what happens when Set 4 comes out and we have this problem all over again? Asui's character card is just inherently busted. Really just begs the question, how many attacks or foundations are we going to ban before we finally just fix Asui, the core root problem? How do we fix Asui? I think it's pretty easy, honestly. All you really have to do is make the first enhance twice per turn. I think making the enhance twice per turn really brings her in line. Her only getting to kick 2 cards from her card pool still lets her do like some pretty crazy things, especially if she just like rolls 5 checks all day. But I think it really brings her in line in the grand scheme of things. She's still going to have those high roll turn 2 scenarios here and there, which again I think is perfectly fine if it happens sometimes. It just makes it way less consistent, and it also just implements a hefty amount of actual decision making into the Asui player's turn, because it's not just play attack, kick, play attack, kick, play attack, kick. You actually have to think about, okay, what ones do I want to put my speed on that's the most valuable on? Those are the ones I got to play early, but would those be more valuable later on in the string? It makes you have to actually like think a little bit about your sequencing and plan your turn out some. I think it's okay to leave her doing the enhance on both turns. Now that she's not readying Amphibious on the opponent's turn after kicking her block, I think that whole interaction was what really made her kicking her blocks so oppressive, or at least feel that way. I think her being able to kick her range attack block is still super fine. Again, like the whole like floating floating around the card pool 24/7 is supposed to be her entire playstyle. I don't want to limit that to just her turn. I think her amount of kicks being limitless is just what really drives the character so forward and makes her like a balancing nightmare. Like they have to actually put a lot of thought into every single kick or ranged attack on these symbols that they print from here on out ever, and that's just a total nightmare. And again, like the other two, if you think she's still a little too strong with that, if it's not heavy-handed enough, the other half of this list is going to look at her a little bit in some way as well. Now moving on to the second half of the ban list, this is where things are going to get really interesting. I think everyone can agree that these three characters are nuts and a little problematic and really need to be dealt with. The other half on this ban list, though, is going to consist of 3 different cards that I think just do not belong in the game right now. I think they're just way too strong, and we do not have a place for them. Maybe in the future we will, but right now we just simply were not ready for these cards. And the first one on that list is going to be a long-time hater, and that's Crow and Frog Takedown. We need to take away Crow and Frog. We need to take away the takedown. This card is just way too good, man. I simply cannot stand everything this card is doing. This card should never have been a 5-diff. It should never have been a ranged attack. It should not be readying anything in your stage if you're 2 of the best characters in the game, including your character card. Like, oh man, this card just does way too much. Crow and Frog at its core is like, okay, a free attack, it does nothing, but it's a free attack that doesn't count as progressive. At its core, that is not an inherently busted concept. However, when you factor in the fact that, like, if you check a 5, it's literally free. It has a very relevant keyword in ranged. It has secret hidden text in, again, 2 of the best characters in the game that you just get to ready anything you want. You get a free seal with Irrefutable. You get a free draw with Exhausted Exclamation. You can use Petty Squabble and then re-ready your character. I think the concept of it could maintain an attack that doesn't count is like a fine concept. I mean, we've seen it with the Eraser attack, right? Whiplash from the starter deck. That card has the same exact core design text as Crow and Frog, but without all of the other busted bells and whistles, and is only restricted to a handful of decks being able to play it. Crow and Frog is the exact opposite. Every single deck in the game can play this card if you want. And truthfully, the more I see decks doing well with this card, especially with Tokoyami and Asui being so good right now, the more I see it, the more I think that this card just needs to go. It's finally time to take Crow and Frog out to the back and put it out of its misery. I just don't think this card has much of a place in the game anymore. It's just unhealthy. It's just blatantly unhealthy. And again, it serves as a double nerf to Tokoyami and Asui as well, because they are 2 of the best decks right now, and this way you get to put a little extra nerf on them without having to neuter their character cards and their core concepts too much. So Crow and Frog just needs to go the way of the dodo. Now next we're going to move on to something very different. We're going to go from an attack to a foundation. We're going to go from a very old card to a very new card. Guys, I think that we just have to go from one with nature to none with nature. I don't think that we were ready for this card flat out. When I first read this card, like, I found that it was a standard card, or well, okay, I knew it was a standard card because Jose is a human being that's in my life, but I didn't really know exactly what it did. I found out that it just did the exact same thing, and I said, huh, the old heads are going like really crazy about this. Is it actually going to be that bad? A card in hand for essentially 2 speed and 1 damage? That is good, but like, it's a 2/5 with a 3 low block. Like, is that really that busted? It just reading it on paper didn't feel game breaking to me. Then suddenly, when I was playing against these hyper aggro decks and all their moves had a free +2 speed +1 damage, and discarding didn't matter because they were killing me anyway, I suddenly was definitely feeling the power of Mother Nature there. One with Nature is a card that, like, again, just reading it doesn't feel like it's game shattering, it's format warping, it's meta defining. It doesn't really feel like it's any of those things, and inherently I don't think it is. And that's the duality of this card, right? It doesn't shatter concepts, and it also doesn't read like anything super impressive because it's just a big stat bonus. I think it's a combination of those 2 things that make this card feel very unseeming, and it isn't until you really start playing against it and you really start playing with it and you realize how many games are going to be won purely off of the back of having a couple One with Natures on board. I think One with Nature is probably the most negotiable card on this list. Like, I think there's a world where this card might not need to be banned, but honestly, the more I play against it and the more I play with it, I'm starting to think that it's just too strong. I think this card was very much like a testing ground, right? This was a little bit of a test to see if they could put a pure unedited standard card into the MHA format and see if it was ready for it. And I think the fact that such an unseeming card like One with Nature, it's literally just stats. It's just a stat bonus, right? How could it be so crazy? The fact that it's making such waves in our format just really shows like how like statistically behind we are of standard and how we just weren't ready for a card like this. But I think I would really just like to see this card go, especially because it gets to serve as a double small nerf to Tokoyami and Kirishima, because they're two of the decks on those two symbols that are really breaking this card right now. And maybe when these decks aren't using it, it feels a little less busted, but I don't know, man. Even when stuff like Midnight and Toru are throwing this card at me, it feels really too strong. I think One with Nature just has to go, guys. I think I want this card out of the format. And now finally, dear viewers, the last card on this list. We're gonna end this list much like we started it, and that's with a blue card. You guys know what it is, man. Seizing the Advantage has got to go. It's got to be released. We must go from seizing the advantage to releasing it. I've already talked about this card to great lengths back in my best Heroes Clash cards list. This card sat all the way at number 1 because this card's just absolutely nuts, man. This card for no cost effectively reads, you just build it from your hand as a free, apathetic, and let's fight bad guys with no restrictions in one, and you do it all at response speed. And for something that has a very playable +2 block mod and checks a 5, that's just insane. Like, apathetic checks a 4, Apathetic checks a 4, and Let's Fight Bad Guys can only pump Fury attacks. You're doing both of those abilities without those restrictions, all on a 5 check with a very playable block mod. The card is just way too good, man. Then when you start comboing it with stuff like Hardened Jab and you're picking it up and looping it over and over again, it's just absolutely obnoxious. And that's kind of, I think, the other side of this discussion. I see that a lot of people have said you've got to ban Hardened Jab instead of this card because we were kind of just always waiting for a card to break Hardened Jab. I don't think that's quite the case. I just don't think that you print a busted card like this. If this card wasn't so strong, I don't think it'd be a problem. We wouldn't be talking about Hardened Jab. I think no one would really care. I think that's more of a band-aid fix because this card, we just simply, like One with Nature, we're not ready for it. It is a standard card, redesigned and even better for the MHA format. The card is just straight up nothing but benefits, and it also just feels like it really locks down deck building. It feels very set one coordinated effort symptoms, where like if your character had a coordinated effort symbol, you just had to play that symbol. You didn't have other symbols in your character. You had to play that symbol because gaining access to coordinated effort was just so strong. Seizing the Advantage in tandem with One with Nature is a big part of why Earth is just blatantly the strongest symbol right now, and getting rid of this card and taking it out of the equation also puts Kirishima in check from there on out. Like I said earlier, if you thought that just making his twice per turn, once per turn wasn't enough, with this list, he's also losing One with Nature and Seizing the Advantage, and I think that more than brings the character in line. Furthermore, the last best deck on this list that we haven't really talked about is Jiro, and honestly, I think Jiro is a little under the curb compared to the rest. Still a very good deck for sure. She just takes a little bit longer to get going, so she's more fair in that aspect, but she is still really strong right now, and this gets to be a small nerf to her as well, which I'm also super duper fine with. I don't think Jiro is a character that really needs to be addressed, but if we inadvertently give her a tap on the wrist when she's like the 4th, 5th best deck, I also think that that's super fine. The other main one here that we haven't talked about is Ojiro 2, and a lot of these nerfs affect him as well. Not a character that I think is like a problem by any means, but if we accidentally tap him on the wrist, I also have no qualms with that. So I think all of those things lining up just make Seizing the Advantage a really optimal ban. Maybe 3 or 4 sets from now, when like every symbol has a way to protect their stuff from being flipped, this card could also come back in some capacity. But right now, I feel exactly the same as I do about it with One with Nature, and that I think this card just needs to go, no questions asked. And so that is my full ban list breakdown. I think these 6 things really bring the format in line. I think the only thing that might result in this is that like if we hit aggro this hard, right, is it might just shift us back into a much more defensive format, and by that I mean Momo just might become the best deck in the game again. So maybe if these 6 things go through, we've got to test and see what that format looks like, and if Momo just rises to total dominance again, I think honestly there's a lot more answers to her now in the world of set 3 that I don't think that could happen. And in the event that Momo just becomes the best deck again, then maybe we have to look at Momo afterwards. That's the only like real like potential scary byproduct that would come out of this list. Otherwise, I think it would really bring like those 5 best characters, Tokoyami, Kirishima, Asui, Jiro, and Ojiro. I think it really brings them all in line with like the whole rest of the field, and then we just get an extremely wide open and diverse meta, and I think that we just get an extremely expressive and skill intensive meta game. Another big factor of all these 6 changes I want to make is it makes decision making a lot harder in these decks. The character erratas make their decision trees a lot harder, and the 3 bans remove 3 0 decision inconsequential cards out of the format, and I really just think that those are all very healthy things things to be pushing our metagame into, and I would absolutely adore seeing some changes, maybe not all of these, but at least some of these changes, or ones like them that have similar effects implemented before Worlds. I would like a much more interesting Worlds meta. I don't think that from a entertainment standpoint, the Nationals were as interesting as they could have been. And that's the purpose of this ban list, to push the game into a healthier and more interesting competitive scene. But once again, these are all just my opinions, and if you have some interesting takes as well on a lot of these changes, or things that I'm not trying to change that you think really need to be addressed, maybe there's some elephants in the room that I didn't notice, please let me know down there in the comments section. And if you really like this video, let me know down there as well via the like or the dislike button. And if you want to see more stuff like this, the subscribe button lets me push all of my content into your newsfeed. We got meta discussions like these. We're going to have some new tier lists coming up as the meta continues to solidify. And as always, huge coverage of the most competitive events, deck profiles, deck lists, and a slew of gameplay videos so you can see these things in action as well. For now though, that's all the time I've got. Thanks so much for watching the whole of this video. Look forward to some more interesting things to come as we get closer to freaking Worlds, baby. And I really hope that I can see you in the next one. Bye.